He cheated with my wife, filmed it, but I struck back with his wife. What would you do if your partner came home and calmly said, I was with someone else? Then proceeded to tell you everything in detail? Here's what happened to me. She walked into the room smiling, as if nothing had happened. Her movements were light, confident, even too relaxed for the situation. She quietly opened the kitchen cabinet, took out her favorite mug, and slowly made herself a cup of coffee. I was sitting at the table, gripping the edge of the chair. Inside, I was boiling, but I couldn't make a sound. Her indifference was killing me. She sat across from me, took a sip of coffee, looked me straight in the eye, and finally broke the silence. You probably already suspect something? Yes, I was with someone else. I felt my heart racing. But the worst was yet to come. She took another sip and calmly continued. And it was the best night of my life. I couldn't comprehend how she could say this so calmly, even with a hint of a satisfied smile. There was no regret in her voice, no trace of guilt. I stayed silent. It felt like the words were stuck in my throat. But she didn't stop. You know, we lost something between us a long time ago. And now I finally feel alive again. Those words hit me harder than any punch to the chest. But what she said next completely destroyed me. I sat there silently, trying to deal with the whirlwind of emotions. Her words echoed in my head. It was the best night of my life. I finally feel alive. I tried to pull myself together. And now what? Do you think I'll just accept this? She looked at me, leaning forward slightly. I don't expect you to accept it, but I don't want to lie anymore either. We both know we've lost our passion. You just didn't want to admit it. It was cold logic, but her words felt like a sentence. I asked, so what now? Is this your decision? She averted her gaze. I don't know, but I can't keep living this lie anymore. Anger overwhelmed me. A million questions swirled in my head, but instead, I just said, I need time. Can you leave me alone? She got up, took her cup, and left the room without even looking back. I was left alone with my thoughts, feeling like my entire life was falling apart before my eyes. The next day, I couldn't find peace. Her note lay on the kitchen table, but every word in it felt cold and detached. I need to think. I'll be back in the evening. She needed to think? She left me alone with shattered thoughts. I couldn't hold myself together any longer. I had too many questions, and I wanted the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When she came back that evening, I got straight to the point. Do you want to explain to me what all of this means? She sat at the same table, with the same calm demeanor, and said, I don't know if you need this, but I'll answer. Her words were like a blade, cold, precise, and merciless. We met by chance. It wasn't planned. He gave me something you haven't in a long time. I don't know what you want to hear, but that's the truth. I felt like every word was tearing me apart from the inside. How long has this been going on? I asked, barely restraining my anger. She paused for a moment, then answered, 3 months. 3 months. She deceived me for 3 months, and I didn't notice. But the worst was yet to come. Why did you come back to me after this? She looked me straight in the eye. Because I still don't know what I want. Those words crushed me. She wasn't remorseful, nor was she trying to justify herself. She didn't care that she had destroyed everything we'd built over the years. I sat there, staring at her, unable to find the right words. Inside, anger, pain, and helplessness raged within me. After a long pause, she finally said, It's Jake. Her words hung in the air like the deafening silence after an explosion. Jake? Those 2 syllables turned everything upside down. The person who had always been there for me, someone I had shared my deepest secrets with, was now a part of this betrayal. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though it lasted only a few seconds. Trying to understand how this could have happened felt impossible, as if every logical thread unraveled before I could grasp it. Jake? Are you serious? Jake, the guy I've known for over 10 years? Jake, who spent every holiday with us. The one who sat at our table, laughed, joked? Jake, who I trusted as much as I trust myself. She lowered her head, avoiding my gaze. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just happened by accident. The word accident only fueled my anger. Accident? What does that even mean? Did you accidentally meet? Accidentally get into the same car? Or maybe you accidentally ended up in the same bed. She stayed silent. Her silence was even more painful than the harshest words. Finally, she spoke. We just started talking more. At first, it was innocent conversations. He gave me a ride a few times after work. We talked about life, about us. I thought it was just friendship. Her words felt like mockery. Friendship? I wanted to scream. Instead, questions poured out of me one after another. How long has this been going on? How often did you see each other? Did it happen just once, or has it been going on this entire time? She answered slowly, as if every word was a knife she was forced to pull out of her own soul. For months. It started 4 months ago. For months. For months of lies, deceit, and betrayal by the two people I trusted most. She tried to explain. I didn't know how to stop it. When we kissed for the first time, I realized it was more than just friendship. But I was scared to tell you. Jake was scared too. He didn't want you to find out. He convinced me to stay quiet. Of course, he convinced you to stay quiet. Convenient. And now what? Did he think I'd never find out? Or were you both hoping I'd just turn a blind eye and everything would go back to normal? Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no regret in them, just deep exhaustion. I know I did wrong, but I couldn't live with it anymore. I had to tell you the truth. Her words left behind a heavy, cold silence. The question of what to do next remained unanswered. She didn't know what she wanted. Neither did I. But one thing was clear. Our lives would never be the same. She admitted that it all began during one of our family dinners. Jake had stayed behind to help her in the kitchen after everyone else had moved to the living room. At first, it was just a simple conversation. Jokes, smiles. But then, one day, his hand brushed her shoulder. She called it nothing special. But that was when everything started to change. After that evening, Jake began texting her. Late at night, during work, even while we were all sitting at the same table during another get-together with friends. They were just innocent messages, she said. But innocent, they were not. He texted me right in the middle of one of our dinners together. You were laughing at his jokes, and he was sending me a message. That dress looks amazing on you. Too bad you didn't wear it for me. Those words cut through me like a knife. I remembered that dress. She wore it during our last dinner with friends. I had told her how stunning she looked, and she had just smiled, not even looking me in the eye. She continued. At first, I thought it was just his silly attempts to get attention. But then, he sent me this. I want to see you alone. And I agreed. I felt everything around me begin to shake. You agreed? How could you? When was this? Do you remember when I said I was going to see a friend because she was going through a tough time? It was that night. We met at his place. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. Every sentence felt like another sentence being passed. That night, when I was worried about whether she had safely arrived at her friend's, the same night I sent her a text saying, I hope you're okay. She was with him. And she had responded as if nothing had happened. She kept talking, and every word felt like a blow. It turned out Jake had been paying attention to her for a long time. She recalled an incident months ago when he accidentally touched her hand while cooking dinner together. Back then, I didn't think much of it. But now I realize it was more than just a friendly gesture. And then it got worse. He started sending her messages almost every day. At first, they were innocent. How are you? How's your day? Then they became more direct. You look stunning in that dress. I wish we could spend time alone. She tried not to respond, but over time, she gave in. Do you remember our trip in August when you stayed home because of work? That's when we spent our first evening together. It hit me like a punch to the gut. In August, I really had stayed home, overwhelmed with work. She told me she was going to visit her sister for the weekend. Now, that story felt completely different. That's when he told me he wanted me. At first, I said no, but then I gave in. I don't know how it happened. There was a passion between us that I hadn't felt in a long time. When she said that, a storm of emotions surged through me. Anger, pain, humiliation. Do you even understand what you've done? How could you let him do this? And how could you come home afterward and look me in the eye as if nothing happened? She didn't answer. Her silence was worse than any words. But then she added, Jake said he wants me to stay with him, but I don't know what I want. That was the last straw. Jake hadn't just betrayed me. He wanted to destroy everything. The man I trusted more than anyone else. She stared at the table, as if afraid her words would shatter what little remained. It's gone further than I ever imagined. Jake said he wants more than just secret meetings. He wants me to leave you and move in with him. I struggled to breathe. And you? You considered it? You actually thought about it? She lifted her head, and in her eyes, I saw something between regret and confusion. I didn't know what to do. I was confused. On one hand, I felt something real with him. But on the other hand, you're a part of my life. I didn't know how to make a decision. I leaned back in my chair, trying to decipher whether this was a genuine confession or just another excuse. Then she added, he didn't just want me to leave you. Last week, he proposed to me. He wants us to move to another city together and start a new life. Those words knocked the ground out from under me. Jake, the friend who sat beside me for years, who listened when we talked about our dreams, was now planning to build a new life with my wife? And you? What did you say to him? Her silence was worse than any words. She didn't say no. She didn't say yes. She just stayed silent. She tried to continue speaking, but her voice grew weaker with each word. Jake is also in a complicated situation. He has a family. He's married. I froze. You mean he's been cheating on his wife with you? And you just decided to join in on this lie? She nodded. His marriage has been falling apart for a long time. He said they're unhappy together, that he's wanted to leave her for a while. I laughed, but it was bitter, filled with irony. And you believed him? Did you think he'd leave his wife for you? What about his children? Did you even think about them? Her expression shifted as she said the next words. They don't have children. He told me she just doesn't want a divorce, that she's holding on to him out of habit. He's suffering because of it. Those words felt like a slap. Jake, who sat beside his wife at dinner, who always seemed like the perfect husband, was now revealed as a master of a double life. And you? Did you meet her? Did you look into her eyes when you went to him? How could you be part of this, knowing she probably has no idea her marriage is falling apart because of you? She didn't answer. Her silence confirmed my worst fears. She admitted that Jake had a wife, and that confession was another blow. The picture I had in my mind grew more twisted. Jake, the man who always seemed like the ideal husband, was now not only a traitor in my life, but was also destroying his own family. He said they've been distant for a long time, that she's holding on to the marriage out of routine, not love. Those words sounded like a poorly crafted excuse. But she's still his wife. And you knew that when you decided to start a relationship with him? She nodded, lowering her eyes. I knew, but he always said they'd divorce. That he was just waiting for the right moment. The right moment? I laughed bitterly. And that moment came when you got into his bed? She avoided answering. Instead, she admitted she had met his wife more than once. We met at his house when she wasn't there. But one time, I left earlier than planned, and we ran into each other at the door. She greeted me, smiled. I barely held myself back from turning around and running away. This scene was beyond anything I could imagine. You stood in front of her, knowing what you were doing to her marriage, and you just said, hi? I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't do anything. My thoughts started circling around Jake's wife. What did she know? Did she suspect anything? Her face now stood vividly in my mind, embodying everything wrong with this situation. She tried to justify herself, but every word only heightened the tension. Jake wasn't just a friend. He was someone I had always considered a model family man. I often saw him with his wife. She always seemed calm, happy. But now, those images felt like illusions. You saw her? How could you look her in the eyes, knowing what was happening behind her back? I didn't want to meet her, but one day it happened. She came home earlier than we expected. We ran into each other right at the door. And what did you say to her? I just said, hi. She didn't suspect anything. She just smiled and walked inside. Those words hit like a cold shower. Imagining them standing face to face, my wife talking to her, fully aware she was destroying her life, was unbearable. And you just left it like that? You didn't even think about the fact that she probably suspects nothing, while you're ruining her life just as much as mine. I know it's wrong, but Jake told me their marriage was already dead, that they were only together for appearances. He said she clung to him because she was afraid of being alone. I felt something tighten inside me. Jake wasn't just deceiving me. He was creating an entire false reality around his life. And you believe that? You honestly think he'll leave her? This is the same man who's been hiding you from everyone, even me, for 4 months. She sighed. I don't know what to think. I don't know if he really means it. But I know I can't keep living like this. My thoughts circled back to his wife. She seemed like an innocent victim in all this, yet I couldn't understand how she could miss the signs. She lived with him, saw him every day. Did she know anything? Or maybe she knew and chose to stay silent. She remained quiet, but every second of her silence only fueled my anger. I wanted to know everything, even things I might not want to hear. Tell me everything. How it started. Don't hide anything. She took a deep breath, as if deciding to confess was the hardest thing she had ever done. It happened one evening when you were busy with work. We met at his house, and it started as just a regular conversation. But then everything changed. Changed how? Speak plainly, I said, my voice cold as ice. She lowered her gaze but continued. At first, it was just a kiss. He said he couldn't hold back anymore, that he'd been dreaming of me for a long time. I didn't know how to react, but I didn't stop him. And then what? I demanded, needing to know every detail, though each new sentence cut deeper. We moved to the bedroom. It all happened so fast, so passionately. I felt like a different person. He told me I was beautiful, that I deserved more. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I hadn't felt that way in so long. Those words were like a knife to the heart. I imagined every moment of what she described, and it destroyed me. And after that, you just came home as if nothing happened? She nodded. I felt ashamed, but at the same time, I felt something else. It was like I was alive again. I couldn't hold back. And this has been going on for 4 months? For 4 months, you've been living a double life? Yes, but I can't hide it anymore. I knew you needed to hear this. She fell silent, and I felt each of her words sink into me, like experiencing pain but also something else, something I couldn't quite identify. I listened to her, unable to stop, even though part of me was broken, and another part, intrigued. He told me I didn't know real satisfaction, that he could give me something you hadn't been able to for a long time. And I couldn't say no. It happened so quickly, and I couldn't turn back. I felt my heart racing, not from pain, but from something else. Something dark and forbidden stirred inside me. I found myself captivated, more than I should have been. I imagined it in vivid detail. Jake, my friend, having the opportunity to touch her in ways I hadn't in years. Are you saying he was better than me? My words came out emotionless, but I could feel a strange, almost twisted curiosity creeping into my voice. She slowly lifted her gaze, her eyes filled with confusion. Not in the way you think. I can't explain it. It was just intense. He was confident. He knew how to do things differently. I couldn't resist it, and I don't regret it. Her confession drew a deep breath from me. I hadn't expected this reaction from myself. Something inside me stirred, and I realized I wanted to know more. I wanted her to continue. My wife with my best friend. It sounded so forbidden, so dangerously seductive. I want to know more, I said, my words more of a question than a statement. She flinched slightly, as if realizing I was no longer the same person I had been just moments ago. We met at his apartment. He was everything I had always wanted. Confident, unrestricted. With him, I didn't have any control, and that excited me. I felt the dark side of my emotions flare up, and I couldn't tell if it was anger or something else entirely. At the same time, I became curious about what had happened between them. Every detail, every moment. And after that, you just came home? My words slid through clenched teeth, and I couldn't hide the excitement creeping into my tone. I couldn't stop. We did it again and again, and I felt like he was taking over me more and more each time. Her words ignited a fire inside me, and I couldn't hold back anymore. My emotions were a chaotic blend of anger, pain, and a strange exhilaration. I listened as she spoke. Each detail about Jake consuming her was like fuel to this new, twisted part of me. She kept talking, her words growing bolder, as if she no longer feared confessing. Do you want to know what he did? Why I couldn't stop? Because he made me feel wanted in a way I hadn't felt in so long. Those words struck deep, but simultaneously fueled my curiosity. What exactly did he do? I asked. I surprised myself with how calmly I said it, though inside, I was boiling. He was persistent but gentle. He knew what he wanted and didn't stop until he got it. The first time I stayed at his place, he didn't even give me time to think. He just came up to me, held me, pinned me against the wall, and said, "You want this as much as I do." I pictured that moment, and as strange as it seemed, something about it gripped me. I felt adrenaline surge through me, pushing me to keep listening. After that, he acted. He was completely in control, and that was something I hadn't felt in so long. He made me surrender, and I couldn't do anything about it. It was so intense, so forbidden, that I didn't even regret what had happened. I spoke again, and you kept going back to him, over and over, because it felt right? She looked at me, her gaze painfully honest. Yes, and because I knew he would do anything to keep me as his. I felt every word she said pulling me deeper into this world, into these moments she had shared with him. I knew it should hurt, but instead, I wanted more. I wanted to know every detail, every second they had spent together. Do you even realize what you're doing to me right now? How am I supposed to process this? I asked, not really expecting an answer. She remained silent, but I could see she felt no shame in her confession. She had already crossed the point of no return. She lowered her head, as if hesitating to say more. But then she sighed and continued, "There's something else you need to know. He recorded us." Her words were like an explosion. What do you mean? He recorded you? How? She met my gaze, her eyes filled with tension. He said he wanted to keep those moments for himself, that it was just for him, and that he would never show them to anyone. I believed him. My head was spinning. I tried to imagine it, but even the thought of Jake having those recordings was unbearable. At the same time, deep down, I felt a strange, dark desire to see them. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't push the thought away. Where are these recordings? She looked confused. He keeps them at his place. I saw him transfer the videos to his computer, but he said no one else would ever see them. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to contain my rage. It no longer felt like just betrayal. This was something more. It was manipulation, control, and my so-called friend's attempt to completely destroy everything we had built together. And what if he's lying? What if he's already shown it to someone? Did you think about that? She shook her head. I don't know, but I knew I had to tell you. My thoughts began to solidify into a plan. I knew I had to act. This wasn't just about us anymore. Jake's wife was now part of the equation. I sat in silence, processing everything I'd learned. The recordings. Jake had left evidence, and those recordings could be the key to unraveling everything. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about control, about how Jake was playing with people's lives without considering the consequences. I decided to act. Waiting wasn't an option anymore. The next morning, I remembered how often I'd seen Jake at the cafe, working on his laptop. That thought became my first lead. Jake was inseparable from his tech, so if the recordings existed, they might be there. I headed to the cafe. Jake was at his usual corner table. His wife was nowhere in sight, and the laptop screen displayed charts and spreadsheets. A typical scene, but now it felt completely different. I approached, trying to mask my emotions. Jake looked up, momentarily surprised, then his familiar smile returned. "Hey man, what's up? Why so early? Something wrong?" "Just thought I'd drop by. Can we talk?" I replied, sitting across from him. Jake nodded, though it was clear he hadn't expected this unexpected visit. I worked to stay calm, but inside, I was boiling. The conversation started with small talk. Work, weather, the news. Then I made my move. "I heard from my wife that you two get along well. She even said you've been helping her with a few things. How's that going? Jake tensed slightly, but tried not to show it. Yeah, I help her out sometimes. She's a great woman. You know that. She is great. So great that you decided to record her? I lingered on the word, staring directly into Jake's eyes. Jake froze. His hands paused on the keyboard for a moment, then he laughed nervously. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I know what you've been doing. Did you really think it would stay just between you two? Jake tried to stay composed, but his voice betrayed his unease. Listen, you don't understand. It's not what you think. Oh, I understand perfectly. And now I want to see it. You've got those recordings on your laptop, don't you? Jake stood up, but I was faster. I pushed down on his shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. Sit. I'm here to settle this peacefully. But if you don't show me, I'll find it myself. The tension rose, and at that moment, we both knew there was no turning back. Jake forced a smile, but it was strained. Listen, this isn't what you think. We had a connection, but it's just a mistake. A mistake? I scoffed. It was such a big mistake that you decided to keep it on your laptop? You know I'll find those recordings. So either show them to me now, or we'll handle this differently. Jake tried to deflect. I'm not showing you anything. It's personal, and it has nothing to do with you. I leaned in closer, my voice lowering but growing more intense. Personal? You did this with my wife. You invaded my life. Everything you've got now concerns me. Show me the recordings. For a few seconds, we stared at each other in silence. Then Jake quickly closed his laptop and stood up. You're crossing the line, man. This is too much. I didn't move, but my voice remained cold and firm. If I'm crossing the line, then what did you do? Consider this a warning. You don't want to see my next move. Jake turned, grabbed his laptop, and walked toward the exit. I stayed seated, but my decision was already made. Action needed to be taken immediately. I couldn't stop thinking about Jake's wife. She seemed like the victim in all of this, as deceived as I was. But was she really? I resolved to find out and understand if she knew anything about her husband's secret life. I started by looking for her social media profile. A few minutes of searching, and there she was, Emily. Her page was perfect. Pictures of her and Jake on vacation, smiling faces, captions like, my one and only, and love of my life. It was so flawless that it was infuriating. I scrolled through a few posts until I found one from 2 days ago. Tonight's dinner with friends was amazing. The caption under a photo of her smiling at a restaurant. Among the guests was Jake, and it ignited a fresh wave of anger. How could he so openly continue living his life, knowing he was destroying others? I decided to act. I knew from her posts that Emily often attended a local yoga studio. The next morning, I waited outside the studio, ready to confront her when she came out. Emily sat silently for a few minutes, gripping her coffee cup so tightly it seemed like it might shatter. Her eyes were fixed on the table, deep in thought about everything she'd just heard. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. You're telling me he planned all of this? That he recorded everything for what? I leaned in, my voice steady but tense. I don't know his full intention, but what I do know is that this wasn't just a moment of passion. It's manipulation, control. He didn't just betray you or me. He made sure to leave evidence, for himself or maybe for something worse. Emily's face hardened, her jaw clenching as she processed the betrayal. Why would he do this? We've been together for years. I thought I knew him. And now you're telling me he's been living this double life, recording these things without considering what it means. Her words faltered as tears welled up in her eyes. I could see the struggle in her, anger, heartbreak, and disbelief all colliding at once. I didn't come here to hurt you, Emily. I came here because you deserve to know the truth, I said, my tone softening. She looked up at me, her voice suddenly firm. And what are you planning to do about it? What do we even do with this? I hesitated for a moment, trying to steady my own thoughts. I think we need to confront him together. He's been playing with both our lives. We deserve answers, and he needs to face the consequences. Emily nodded slowly, though her expression was still full of doubt. And what if he denies everything? What if he tries to spin this around? Then we have the recordings, I replied firmly. If he denies it, we show him that he can't escape the truth. He doesn't get to walk away from this unscathed. She exhaled sharply, leaning back in her chair. And then what? We ruin his life? We expose him? That's up to us, I said. But first, we need to understand the full extent of what he's done. Emily fell silent again, her expression shifting from hurt to resolve. Finally, she nodded. Okay, let's do it. But I need to know everything. I need to see what you saw. Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. I realized then that whatever happened next, neither of our lives would ever be the same. I don't know his motives, Lucas replied, leaning in closer. But I saw the video. He's used your trust and mine, and he still thinks it'll all stay hidden. I think it's time to show him that's not the case. Emily looked up, her face a mix of anger and confusion. I always knew something was off. He started to change when he was around me. He used to be so attentive, so caring, but lately, I felt like I didn't even know him anymore. And now this confirms it. Lucas saw her eyes begin to well up with tears. She raised a hand to wipe them away, but before she could, he gently reached across the table and touched her fingers. You're not alone in this. I'm a victim of his game too. But together, we can make him pay. Emily looked at him, a flicker of hope mixed with distrust in her eyes. How do we do that? She asked. First, we need to find all the recordings. I'm sure it's not just my wife. This might be a pattern of his. Emily exhaled, her body relaxing slightly. You think he's done this before? That he used me too? I don't know. But if we find the evidence, we can put him in a position where he can't win. If he's been destroying our lives, we have every right to fight back. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of mutual understanding and shared pain. Thank you for telling me the truth, Emily finally said. I don't know what I would have done if I kept living this illusion of a marriage. Lucas gave her a faint smile, though it was laced with bitterness. We both deserve better. Jake won't keep us trapped anymore. We'll fix this. The evening was quiet, but heavy with tension. After hours of discussing their plan, reviewing evidence, and analyzing what they'd uncovered, Lucas and Emily were alone in the apartment she was temporarily renting. Her face looked tired, but her eyes burned with determination. Are you sure this will work? She asked, clutching a cup of tea in her hands. We have to try. If we let this go, he'll destroy us completely, Lucas replied. Emily took a deep breath and sat next to him on the couch. Their knees barely touched, but the contact felt electric. I still don't know how this happened, she said, lowering her head. I thought everything was fine. I thought we were happy. Lucas turned to her. We all want to believe our lives are perfect. But when the cracks start to show, we either don't notice or don't want to. Emily looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. How can you be so strong? After everything that's happened, you keep fighting. I feel like I'm about to break. Lucas didn't respond with words. He simply reached out and gently touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand in return, her breathing growing heavier. I don't even know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, Lucas replied. A charged silence filled the room. It was different now, thick with tension that only grew stronger. Lucas leaned in slightly, his gaze locked on hers. She didn't look away. I'm not sure this is right, she said, her voice trembling. But the words sounded more like an invitation than a protest. Right is what keeps us whole right now, Lucas replied, before gently brushing his lips against hers. Their first kiss was cautious, almost hesitant, but it quickly deepened into something more. All their emotions, pain, anger, frustration, poured into that moment. Their hands found each other, and time seemed to stop. Emily pulled back slightly to look at him. I don't know where this will take us. But right now, I just want this. So do I, Lucas whispered, and they kissed again, passion overtaking them as they forgot the world around them. Later, as they sat together on the couch, their gazes met again, and it felt as though time had stopped. The tension between them was palpable, the space around them filled with unspoken words and emotions. I always thought Jake was the perfect husband, Emily said softly, her eyes fixed on Lucas. I never imagined he could do something like this. He deceived us both, Lucas replied, gently touching her hand. But that doesn't mean we have to let him destroy us. You're right. But sometimes, I feel so alone. If it weren't for you. You're not alone, Lucas interrupted gently but firmly. We'll get through this. Together. Their lips met, this time in a slower, deeper kiss. All the anger, frustration, and passion they had been holding inside flowed into that one moment. Lucas's hands wrapped around her, pulling her closer. Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in even more, her fingers lightly tracing his neck before tangling in his hair. Lucas could feel her heart beating faster, and it only heightened his desire. They moved to the edge of the couch. Her warm body pressed against his, and every touch seemed to lift the weight of the past few days. Lucas took his time, his movements careful yet charged with an energy he hadn't felt in years. This is all that matters right now, Emily whispered, their eyes locking. Just you and me. Just you and me, Lucas repeated, his fingers brushing her face before sliding down to her neck. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Their closeness was no longer just an expression of emotion. It was a desperate attempt to find solace in each other. Emily relaxed, giving herself over to the moment completely. Her body responded to every touch, every movement, and they forgot about the pain and betrayal that had brought them together. This wasn't just an escape from reality. It was the beginning of a new connection. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, signaling a new day. Emily woke first, her gaze falling on Lucas as he slept beside her. His breathing was calm, and his face looked as though the shadow of worry had finally lifted. She carefully got up, trying not to wake him, but Lucas stirred and opened his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but husky. "Good morning," Emily replied, smiling softly, though a shadow of uncertainty lingered in her expression. They sat in silence for a few minutes, both trying to process the events of the previous night. It wasn't an awkward silence, but rather one filled with mutual understanding and trust. "I don't know what to think," Emily said, staring at her hands. "Last night, for the first time in so long, I felt alive. But this can't be right, can it?" "Maybe nothing about this is right," Lucas replied, shifting closer to her. "But that doesn't mean it was a mistake." Emily turned to him, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Do you really believe that? That this wasn't a mistake?" "I think we both needed this," Lucas said. "We've lost so much because of Jake, and I refuse to let him control how we feel any longer." Emily was quiet, then took his hand and squeezed it. "You're right. I don't know where this will take us, but for the first time, I feel stronger than ever." "And that's what matters," Lucas replied, looking at her as if he had found something real for the first time in years. Lucas and Emily sat together on the couch. Her head rested on his shoulder, and his arm held her gently. It was a moment of peace in the storm they were weathering. "You know," Emily said softly, almost to herself, "I used to think my marriage to Jake was perfect." Lucas glanced at her, sensing she was ready to share something deeply personal. "What made you change your mind?" he asked gently. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of a pillow. "It all started so beautifully. We dated, fell in love, and he was everything a woman could dream of. He was so charming. But then things began to change." Lucas stayed silent, giving her the space to continue. "After a few years of marriage, I started noticing he was becoming distant. He stopped caring about how I felt, stopped paying attention to the little things that used to bring us closer. I tried to talk to him, but he always had excuses. Work is stressful, it's just a phase." And then I started noticing other things. Emily lifted her head and looked into Lucas's eyes, her own filled with pain. "He started disappearing in the evenings. At first, it was phone calls he didn't want me to hear. Then meetings he wouldn't talk about. And whenever I tried to figure out what was going on, he'd accuse me of imagining things. And I believed him. Back then, I still believed him." "When did you realize it wasn't just work?" Lucas asked carefully. "A year ago," Emily said, her voice quieter now. I found messages on his phone. From another woman. Very explicit messages. She paused, gathering her courage. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, but I couldn't. I didn't want to shatter the illusion of our marriage. I kept hoping it was just a mistake, something that would pass. Lucas nodded, his expression filled with empathy. You didn't deserve that, Emily. None of this is your fault. Emily smiled faintly, though tears glistened in her eyes. And neither did you. I think we both deserve a chance to move on, to rebuild, even if it's messy. Lucas placed a comforting hand over hers. We'll get through this. Together. Lucas tightened his grip on her hand, but didn't interrupt. And then he started doing it openly. Not directly in front of me, but he stopped even trying to hide it. I felt so worthless. I thought it was my fault, that I wasn't good enough for him anymore. Her voice trembled, and Lucas gently wrapped his arms around her. It's not your fault, Emily. It was his choice. His betrayals are about what he did, not what you didn't do. I know, she said, her voice steadier. But when I look back at everything that happened, I can't stop thinking. Why didn't I see it sooner? Why did I let him play me for so long? You loved him. That's not a weakness. It's part of who you are, Lucas replied softly. Emily turned to him, and their eyes met. In that moment, something stronger than words passed between them. Both had endured pain and disappointment, but now, in this closeness, they found a new strength. Thank you for being here, she said, managing a small smile. And I'll stay, Lucas promised. Lucas and Emily sat at the table, a laptop with evidence in front of them. They spent hours analyzing the files, searching for anything that could expose Jake for what he had done. This is more than just infidelity, Lucas said, scrolling through another video. He didn't just record your moments with him. There are other women. It's like some sick collection of trophies. Emily pushed her coffee cup aside, her hands trembling slightly. I never imagined he was capable of something like this. This isn't just about us anymore. No, Lucas agreed. It's about everyone he deceived and used. We have to stop him. Emily paused, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the table. How? If we go public with this, it could destroy not just him, but us. He'll do anything to protect himself. Lucas leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. We have two options. We can take this to the police if we find evidence of illegal activity. Or, Emily raised her eyes, waiting for him to continue. Or we use it as leverage. We force him to confess. To us, to his wife, to everyone he's betrayed. He needs to see that he's lost all control. Emily thought for a moment, her face tense but her eyes showing determination. I think you're right. But we need to do it in a way that leaves him no room to escape. Lucas smiled. That means we need a plan. Later that day, Lucas and Emily went to a small, cozy art gallery. The walls were lined with vibrant paintings, and Sarah stood behind the counter, speaking with a customer. When she saw them approach, her smile became cautious. How can I help you? She asked. Emily stepped forward. Hi, my name's Emily, and this is Lucas. We came to talk about Jake. The smile disappeared from Sarah's face. She glanced around, as if checking to make sure their conversation wouldn't attract attention. I don't know who you are, but I don't want to talk about Jake. Please, Emily insisted. We know what he did to you, and we want to help. We've been hurt by him too. Sarah hesitated, but sighed after a few moments. Fine, but not here. Let's step outside. They left the gallery and sat at a nearby cafe. Sarah looked nervous, her hands clutching her coffee cup tightly. What do you want to know? She asked. Lucas leaned in closer. We know Jake manipulated you, and we know he recorded your moments together. You need to know you're not alone. We have evidence, and we want to hold him accountable. Sarah sighed, tears welling in her eyes. I always knew this would come out eventually. He promised no one would ever find out. But deep down, I always felt that wasn't true. He used me, just like I'm sure he's used so many others. Are you willing to help us? Emily asked, her voice soft but firm. Sarah stayed silent for a long time, but eventually nodded. I'll help. If it stops him, I'll do whatever I can. Lucas, Emily, and Sarah meticulously prepared for their confrontation with Jake. They chose a location where he couldn't easily flee or avoid accountability, a small, private conference room in a hotel. This has to be airtight, Lucas said as they reviewed the evidence. We can't give him a way out. Emily nodded. He's controlled us long enough. It's time we take that power back, Sarah added, her voice shaky but resolute. And if it means exposing everything, then so be it. He can't keep doing this. The three of them worked late into the evening, finalizing their plan. They knew the confrontation would be difficult, but it was the only way to ensure Jake couldn't hurt anyone else. Lucas invited Jake with a neutral tone. We need to talk. It's important. Jake, suspecting nothing serious, agreed to come. When he entered the room, his face was calm at first, but upon seeing Emily and Sarah, he froze for a moment. What's going on here? He asked, forcing a smile. Lucas stepped closer to him, his voice cold and firm. Sit down, Jake. We're here to talk about what you've been doing behind our backs. Jake laughed nervously but sat down. I don't understand what you mean. If this is some kind of joke, I'm not in the mood. This isn't a joke, Emily said, her voice full of emotion. We know about your recordings. We know about your women. And today, it ends. Lucas turned on a laptop and opened a folder of evidence. Videos filled the screen, dozens of recordings Jake had made over the years. His face turned pale. What are you doing? This is illegal, he shouted, his voice tinged with panic. Illegal? What you did is illegal, Sarah replied, her voice trembling but steady. You manipulated us, you used us, and now you'll face the consequences. You have two options, Jake, Lucas said, leaning in closer. First, we take this evidence to the police and your workplace. Second, you admit your guilt to us, stop all of this, and disappear from our lives forever. Jake looked cornered. He nervously wiped sweat from his forehead. You're joking, right? You wouldn't do this. It would ruin you as much as it ruins me. Maybe, Emily replied, but at least we'd know you won't hurt anyone else. Jake sat in silence for several minutes before finally exhaling. Fine. You win. I'll disappear. But if you make this public, you'll suffer too. That's not your concern, Lucas said, his voice final. He left town, took his belongings, and avoided any contact with Emily, Lucas, or Sarah. Emily and Lucas began a new chapter in their lives. Their relationship grew deeper than ever, built on trust and shared experiences. I don't know what I would have done without you, Emily said, holding Lucas's hand. You gave me the strength to fight. And you helped me realize I could let go of the past, Lucas replied, smiling. Sarah also found the strength to move forward. She started working with an organization that helped victims of similar manipulations and decided to use her experience to support others. Though the scars left by Jake never fully healed, they no longer defined the lives of Emily, Lucas, or Sarah. It became just a chapter they had closed to start writing a new story. If you discovered someone had betrayed and manipulated you in such a way, would you seek justice, confront them directly, or try to move on without looking back?